It was a busy Monday morning at Bright Tech, a big tech company in the city. The office was buzzing with people typing on computers, answering phones, and rushing to meetings. Everyone was dressed in fancy suits and shiny shoes, except for one man. This man wore a simple blue uniform and carried a mop and bucket. His name was Mr. Johnson, and he was the janitor. But Mr. Johnson wasn't just any janitor. He had a big secret, one that no one in the office knew. That morning, a new customer named Brad walked into the office. Brad was there to meet the CEO of Bright Tech. He was wearing an expensive suit and had a confident smile on his face. Brad thought he was the most important person in the room. As Brad walked through the office, he accidentally stepped on a wet floor. He slipped a little but didn't fall. Angry, he turned around and saw Mr. Johnson mopping the floor. "Hey, you!" Brad shouted, pointing at Mr. Johnson. "Can't you be more careful? I almost fell because of you. Do you know who I am? I'm here to meet the CEO." Mr. Johnson looked up calmly. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll be more careful," he said politely. But Brad wasn't done. He laughed and said, "You're just a janitor. You'll never understand how important my meeting is. Maybe you should find a better job." Some employees nearby heard Brad's rude words and gasped. They knew something Brad didn't. But before anyone could say anything, Mr. Johnson just smiled and went back to mopping the floor. Brad walked away, still annoyed. He went to the front desk and said, "I'm here to meet the CEO. Where is he?" The receptionist smiled and said, "Of course, sir. The CEO is in his office. Let me take you there." Brad followed the receptionist down the hall. They stopped at a big office door with a sign that said, CEO. Brad straightened his tie, ready to impress the most important person in the company. The receptionist knocked on the door and said, "Mr. Johnson, your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Brad froze. "Mr. Johnson?" he thought. That's the janitor's name. The door opened, and there stood Mr. Johnson, the same man Brad had just mocked. But now Mr. Johnson wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. He was dressed in a sharp suit and tie. Brad's face turned red. You're the CEO?" he stammered. Mr. Johnson smiled. "Yes, I am. I like to spend time cleaning the office sometimes. It helps me stay humble and understand every part of my company." Brad didn't know what to say. He felt terrible for being so rude. Mr. Johnson walked over to his desk and sat down. "Now, Brad, let's talk about your meeting. But first, I think there's something you'd like to say." Brad swallowed hard. He knew he had made a big mistake. But what would happen next? Would Mr. Johnson still want to work with him? Or would Brad lose his chance because of his bad behavior? Brad stood in front of Mr. Johnson's desk, his heart pounding. He opened his mouth to apologize, but before he could say anything, the door to the office burst open. A young woman rushed in, holding a tablet in her hand. She had bright red hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. "Mr. Johnson," she said, out of breath. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have an emergency in the coding department. The new app update is crashing, and no one can figure out why." Mr. Johnson stood up immediately. "Thank you, Clara. I'll be right there." He turned to Brad. "It seems we'll have to continue this conversation later. Feel free to wait here, or you can join me if you'd like to see how we handle problems at Bright Tech." Brad nodded quickly. "I'll come with you," he said, eager to make up for his earlier mistake. The three of them hurried to the coding department, where a group of programmers was gathered around a large screen. A man with a beard and a baseball cap was typing furiously on a keyboard. "It's no use," he said, frustrated. "The code is a mess." Mr. Johnson stepped forward. "Let me take a look, Alex," he said calmly. Everyone in the room watched as Mr. Johnson sat down at the computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, and within minutes, the screen lit up with green text. "There," he said. "The problem was in the third line of code. It's fixed now." The room erupted in cheers. "You're a genius, Mr. Johnson," Clara said, clapping her hands. Brad was amazed. He had no idea the CEO was so hands-on with the company's work. He felt even worse for mocking him earlier. Just then, A loud voice came from the doorway. "What's all the noise about?" Everyone turned to see a tall, muscular man wearing a security guard uniform. His name was Hank, and he was the head of security at BrightTech. Hank had a serious face, but his eyes twinkled with kindness. "Hank," Mr. Johnson said with a smile. "We just fixed the app update. Everything's under control." Hank nodded. "Good to hear. But I'm here because we have another situation. Someone just parked a fancy sports car in the CEO's parking spot. Should I have it towed?" Mr. Johnson chuckled. "That would be my car, Hank. I let Brad here borrow it for the day." Brad's eyes widened. "Wait, that's your car?" he asked, stunned. "Yes," Mr. Johnson said. "I thought it might impress you, but it seems you were more impressed by my mop." Everyone in the room laughed, including Brad. He realized how silly he had been to judge Mr. Johnson by his appearance. As the laughter died down, Clara's tablet beeped. She looked at the screen and gasped. "Mr. Johnson, we just got a message from Tech Global. They want to meet with us tomorrow to discuss a partnership." Mr. Johnson's eyes lit up. "That's fantastic news, but we'll need to prepare. Clara, gather the team. Hank, make sure security is tight. Alex, double-check the app. And Brad." He turned to the now humbled customer. "Would you like to help us? I think you might have some valuable ideas." Brad nodded eagerly. "I'd be honored, Mr. Johnson." The team got to work, and Brad found himself swept up in the excitement. But as the day went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Little did he know, the meeting with Tech Global would bring even more surprises and challenges. The next morning, the BrightTech office was buzzing with energy. Everyone was preparing for the big meeting with Tech Global, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. Brad arrived early, wearing his best suit and carrying a folder full of ideas. He was determined to prove himself to Mr. Johnson and the team. As he walked into the office, he saw Clara rushing by with a stack of papers. "Morning, Brad," she said, barely stopping. "Mr. Johnson wants to see you in the conference room." "Hurry." Brad nodded and hurried to the conference room. When he walked in, he saw Mr. Johnson, Hank, Alex, and a few other team members gathered around a large table. On the table was a holographic display of BrightTech's latest project, a revolutionary new app that could change the way people use technology. "Brad, glad you're here," Mr. Johnson said. "We need your input. Tech Global is known for being tough in negotiations. We have to be ready for anything." Brad took a deep breath. "I've been thinking," he said. "What if we show them not just the app, but how it can help people in real life? Like, maybe we can demonstrate it helping a small business or a school." Mr. Johnson's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. Clara, can we set up a live demo?" Clara nodded. "I'll get right on it." Just then, Hank's walkie-talkie crackled. "Hank, we've got a situation at the front desk," a voice said. Hank frowned. "What's going on?" "There's a woman here claiming to be from Tech Global, but she's not on the guest list." Mr. Johnson raised an eyebrow. "Tech Global's team isn't supposed to arrive for another hour. Let's check this out." The group headed to the front desk, where a woman in a sleek black suit was arguing with the receptionist. "I'm telling you, I'm with Tech Global," she said impatiently. Mr. Johnson stepped forward. "I'm the CEO. How can I help you?" The woman turned to him and smiled. "Ah, Mr. Johnson, I'm Lisa Carter, head of acquisitions at Tech Global. I decided to come early to assess your company before the official meeting." Brad narrowed his eyes. Something about Lisa seemed off. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" he asked. Lisa shrugged. "I like to see how companies operate when they're not expecting me. It gives me a better sense of their weaknesses." Mr. Johnson smiled politely, but Brad could tell he was suspicious too. "Well, Ms. Carter, welcome to BrightTech. Let me show you around." As they walked through the office, Lisa kept asking strange questions. "How secure is your data?" she asked Hank. "What's your backup plan if the app fails?" she asked Alex. "And how much debt is your company in?" she asked Clara. Brad noticed that Lisa was typing everything into her phone. He leaned over to Mr. Johnson and whispered, I don't trust her. I think she's up to something. Mr. Johnson nodded. I agree. Let's keep an eye on her. When they reached the coding department, Lisa stopped in front of Alex's computer. Is this where you store your app's code? She asked casually. Alex hesitated. Yeah, but it's password protected. Lisa smiled. Of course. I wouldn't expect anything less. Just then, Clara ran into the room, looking panicked. Mr. Johnson, someone just tried to hack into our system. Everyone turned to Lisa, who suddenly looked very nervous. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, backing away. Hank stepped in front of her. Why don't we take a look at your phone, Ms. Carter? Lisa's face turned pale. She tried to run, but Hank was too quick. He grabbed her phone and handed it to Mr. Johnson. On the screen was a message. Send the code now. Mr. Johnson's expression turned serious. It seems Tech Global sent a spy to steal our app. This meeting is going to be very different than we expected. Brad clenched his fists. What do we do now? Mr. Johnson smiled. We turn the tables. Let's show Tech Global what happens when they underestimate us. Mr. Johnson handed Lisa's phone back to Hank and turned to the team. We need to act fast. Clara, lock down the system and make sure no data has been stolen. Alex, double-check the app security. Hank, take Ms. Carter to the security office and keep an eye on her. Brad, come with me. Brad followed Mr. Johnson to his office, his mind racing. What's the plan? He asked. Mr. Johnson sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. Tech Global thinks they can outsmart us, but they don't know we've been working on a secret feature for the app. It's called Guardian Mode, and it's designed to protect against hacking and data theft. If we activate it now, we can turn the tables on them. Brad's eyes widened. That's amazing, but how will that stop them from trying to steal the app again? Mr. Johnson smiled. Because Guardian Mode doesn't just protect the app, it sends a signal back to the hacker's device, exposing their location and intentions. If Tech Global tries anything during the meeting, we'll have proof of their wrongdoing. Brad grinned. That's genius. But what about Lisa? What do we do with her? Mr. Johnson leaned back in his chair. We'll let her think she's still in control. Hank will keep her occupied while we prepare for the meeting. When the Tech Global team arrives, we'll be ready. Just then, Clara burst into the office. Mr. Johnson, the system is secure, but I found something strange. Lisa wasn't just trying to steal the app. She was also looking for information about our investors. It seems Tech Global wants to buy them out and take over Bright Tech. Mr. Johnson's expression turned grim. This is bigger than I thought. We need to warn our investors and make sure they don't fall for Tech Global's tricks. Brad raised his hand. I can help with that. My uncle is one of your biggest investors. I can call him and explain what's going on. Mr. Johnson nodded. Good idea. Do it now. Clara, let's get the team together and go over the plan one more time. We need to be perfect. As Brad called his uncle, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. He had started the day as a rude customer, but now he was part of a team fighting to save Bright Tech. When the Tech Global team arrived, they were led to the conference room. The head of the team, a man named Mr. Grayson, smiled confidently as he shook Mr. Johnson's hand. We're looking forward to seeing what Bright Tech has to offer, he said. Mr. Johnson smiled back. Oh, you're in for a surprise. The meeting began, and Mr. Johnson presented the app, carefully avoiding any mention of Guardian Mode. As he spoke, Brad noticed Mr. Grayson glancing at his phone, as if waiting for a message. Suddenly, Clara's tablet beeped. She looked at the screen and whispered to Mr. Johnson. They're trying to hack into the system again. Mr. Johnson nodded subtly. Activate Guardian Mode. A few seconds later, Mr. Grayson's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face turned pale. The screen displayed a message. Hacking attempt detected. All data has been secured and traced back to Tech Global. Mr. Grayson stood up, trying to act calm. I think we've seen enough. We'll be in touch. But before he could leave, Mr. Johnson held up his hand. Not so fast, Mr. Grayson. We know what you've been trying to do. And now, so does everyone else. He pressed a button, and the holographic display in the room changed to show evidence of Tech Global's hacking attempts and their plans to buy out Bright Tech as investors. Mr. Grayson's confidence crumbled. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered. Mr. Johnson crossed his arms. I don't think so, and I'm sure the media will find this story very interesting. As the Tech Global team left in a hurry, Brad felt a sense of victory. But Mr. Johnson turned to him and said, "This isn't over. Tech Global is a powerful company, and they won't give up easily. We need to stay one step ahead." Brad nodded. "What's next?" Mr. Johnson smiled. "Next, we show the world what Bright Tech is really made of." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity at Bright Tech. News of Tech Global's failed attempt to steal the app and take over the company spread quickly. The media praised Bright Tech for its innovation and integrity, and investors rallied behind Mr. Johnson, impressed by how he had handled the situation. Brad became an official part of the team, using his connections and ideas to help strengthen the company. He even apologized to Mr. Johnson again, this time with genuine humility. "I was wrong to judge you," Brad said. "You've taught me that it's not about what someone wears or what job they do. It's about who they are and what they stand for." Mr. Johnson smiled and patted Brad on the shoulder. "We all make mistakes, Brad. What matters is what we learn from them." With Tech Global's reputation damaged, Bright Tech's app became a huge success. Schools, small businesses, and even big companies started using it, and it changed the way people worked and learned. Mr. Johnson made sure to credit the entire team, from the coders to the janitors, for their hard work. One evening, as the team celebrated their success, Clara raised her glass. "To Bright Tech, a company that proves you can succeed without losing your values." Everyone cheered, and Brad felt a deep sense of pride. He had started as a rude customer, but he had grown into someone who valued kindness, teamwork, and humility. The moral of the story: never judge someone by their appearance or job title. True greatness comes from character, humility, and how you treat others. Everyone has something valuable to offer, and kindness and respect can lead to unexpected opportunities and friendships.